what's your favorite Doors song or songs? And then also, what if you can remember it, what is the first song that you heard by the Doors and that sort of drew you into them?
Where I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, you had to make choices for some reason in my high school. You had to make choices. You couldn't like both the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. You had to make a choice. And you couldn't like both Led Zeppelin and the Doors for some reason where I grew up. Those were your choices. And I chose the Rolling Stones and the Doors. And so to this day, I respect and acknowledge the Beatles for everything they did, but I still would almost always turn a Beatles song if I were listening to an old style radio and still prefer the Rolling Stones. And same with the Doors versus Led Zeppelin. I like Led Zeppelin, but I love the Doors. So for me, the listening to classic rock in the late 70s, early 80s, I think I can say with about 99% certainty, Light My Fire was the first song that I heard, but it also could have been Riders on the Storm, which where I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, I'm listening to Pittsburgh radio stations. Yeah, rock radio, 102.5 DVE. That was Pittsburgh's #1 rock station. And that's what we listened to. That's what my uncles listened to when I was growing up. I'm a kid. Riders on the Storm and Light My Fire were the more in constant rotation versus some of the other. Break On Through, probably the third in that, constant rotation in 70s, 80s classic rock radio stations. My favorite song by the Doors is tough to say, but probably LA Woman, then Roadhouse Blues. Probably. Those are the top two.
But both of those are great songs.
Yeah, I'm not the kind of I'm more of a traditionalist. I'm not one of those music people who has to pick the thing that nobody's ever heard. I don't. Yeah, I'm not necessarily a deep cut.
So two things. It's interesting.
Aficionado.
Riders on the Storm is the first song that drew me to the Doors. I don't want to say it's the first I heard. I think I heard a couple of their things before, but when I was really young and not into music or anything, but I was in my uncle's truck driving and he had a cassette tape and he popped it in. The first thing that came on was Riders on the Storm. And it was just such an interesting song, right? It was sort of a very mellow vibe, it wasn't like one of their heavier songs or anything. And then the thunderstorm,
the lightning
and everything. There's something very hypnotic about the whole thing.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown. Like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone. Riders on the storm.
And the lyrics were great too, and the melody was just something about it really caught me, and I remember saying to my uncle, I was like, what is this? What is this? And he's like, oh, it's the Doors. He's like, I used to love these guys when I was a kid. You should check them out, so I did, and that's how I got to it.
I think a lot of people don't realize that back then, up until 1997, 1998, you couldn't just get this stuff.
Yeah.
You couldn't Google Jim Morrison. There's none of it exists. It's effort to find. There has to be a book about it.
Yep.
There has to be a magazine. That's why that Rolling Stone cover story was so important. That's why even through the early there's just no way of knowing. I came to the Doors because of rock radio, and then happened to stumble across the biography, then had other people in my life who were trading albums and, hey, let's listen to this. You couldn't even find the lyrics really unless the band printed them out, you know.
And they didn't do
Somebody
that all the
posted,
time. Yeah.
yeah, somebody posted the other day who remembers having cassette tapes where they'd print on the, you know, and it'd be in the smallest type possible. You'd have to pull it out like an accordion.
Yeah.
Like that's so foreign to today's reader or today's aficionado of whatever. Everything's available. And so back then, most things were not available. And so it's a completely different experience. The music is going to lead your interest, nothing else. And it's not like that anymore in the world. It's the music could be the last thing that you get interested in.